So I'm going to go ahead now and talk about the data on Polatuzumab Vedotin. And just to remind everybody and focus more on this agent in terms of its mechanism of action, Polatuzumab Vedotin selectively binds to a cell surface molecule called CD79B. Now, importantly, why was this selected? Well, CD79B is present on virtually all mature B cells. It is a component of the B cell receptor. When this molecule binds to its receptor, important for the action of antibody-drug conjugates, it's rapidly internalized into the cell in whole, into the lysosome. And it's within the lysosome that ultimately the peptide linker is cleaved via proteases, and the toxin, the MMAE, is released into the cell, which then causes disruption of the microtubules, leading to cellular apoptosis. So importantly, when it's released, not only does it lead to apoptosis of the cell that it's targeting, but it's also believed that some of the MMAE is left intact and actually probably disseminates into the area of the apoptosing cell and may also disrupt some of the microenvironment surrounding and supporting the tumor cells. So there's evidence to suggest that it might have a multimodality mechanism of action. So I'm going to be focusing on the randomized phase 2 trial, which was a comparison of Pola-BR versus BR, as this was the trial that was used as the primary data to support the FDA approval of Polatuzumab. This was a trial that was performed in 2 histologies originally, so it looked at patients with relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma as well as relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. We're going to be focusing on diffuse large B-cell lymphoma today. This trial was targeting patients with relapsed refractory DLBCL who were presumed to be transplant ineligible. So they either were not transplant candidates due to comorbidities or insensitivity to salvage therapy, or they could have been eligible if they'd already failed autologous stem cell transplant. There was initial safety run-in phase, which was done in a phase 1 arm to test the safety of the combination. And this tested the combination of Polatuzumab as 1.8 milligrams per kilogram in combination with BR in 6 patients initially. There was also a side arm where we tested Pola in combination with bendamustine and obinutuzumab. So the design of this trial predated results from Goya, and it was done in anticipation where obinutuzumab may have been an important molecule. As such, there was also a phase 2 expansion of Pola plus BG, but primarily we're going to focus on the phase 2 randomization, which really was a head-to-head comparison of BR alone versus the combination of Pola and BR in relapsed refractory DLBCL. And the primary endpoint of this trial was the PET-CR rate at the end of planned treatment. So these are the patient characteristics at baseline. So this was a randomization of 40 patients in each arm. The median age ranged from 67 to 71. Importantly, there was a broad range of ages of patients included, so from 30 to 86 was the oldest patient entered on the trial. The majority of patients, as for most diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, were male, about 60 to 70% distribution. The majority of patients had advanced stage disease. And importantly, this was a relatively high-risk group of patients where the duration of response to their last treatment was less than 12 months in approximately 80% of patients. To enter onto the trial, patients had to have at least 1 prior line of therapy, but the median prior lines of therapy was 2, and similar in both arms. Importantly, the baseline characteristics across both arms was generally comparable. Generally, none of the patients, or just really very few, have had prior bendamustine, but the majority of patients had had a prior anti-CD20 monoclonal antibody. Again, speaking to the high-risk patient population, approximately 80% of patients overall were actually refractory to their last prior therapy, and between 50 and 70% of patients were considered primary refractory. So this was the primary endpoint of the trial, and you can see, according to this bar graph, that the addition of polatuzumab to the BR backbone led to a marked improvement in the overall response rate, and importantly, in terms of the complete response rate. So comparing the two arms, the PET-CR rate was 18% following BR, but was increased to 40% in the Pola-BR. And you can see as well on the right side of the curve is the best overall response and the best CR rate, which was notably higher in the group of patients getting the polatuzumab combination. Importantly, and also what we'll see a little bit later in some of the curves, is that interestingly, at this point in time when the data was analyzed, 7 patients continue to have an ongoing response of greater than 20 months duration. In addition, it was noteworthy that the combination of Pola-BR actually improved the response rate compared with BR alone, independent of the number of prior lines of therapy. So whether or not patients were receiving it as second-line therapy or third-line and beyond, the triple combination actually improved the overall response rate and the CR rate. Similarly, it also improved outcome regardless of whether or not the patients were considered relapsed or refractory. Also important, ultimately, this improvement in response rate and CR rate led to a marked improvement in the duration of response. So the median of duration of response with the Pola-BR combination was 10.3 months compared with 4.1 months in the BR combination. And also important, the median progression-free survival was markedly improved and was 7.6 months in Pola-BR compared with 2 months in the BR arm. I think most noteworthy in this trial, with a median follow-up of 22.3 months, was that the combination of Pola-BR actually led to a marked improvement in overall survival. And this is probably the first randomized controlled trial in this patient population that's actually demonstrated an improvement in survival. So the median overall survival with Pola-BR was 12.4 months versus 4.7 months with BR. So also, I think quite intriguing from this trial is that there is a hint that some patients actually can achieve quite marked long-term control. So this curve actually summarizes the data that we've seen with some of the longest follow-up of patients receiving Pola-BR. So it's a compilation of patients entered into the initial safety arm of the study, together with patients entered on the Pola-BR arm of the randomized phase 2. So in this curve here, the maximum follow-up goes up to 45.9 months, but the median follow-up is now almost 28 months. And you can see here that it's interesting, but there does seem to be a rather steady, almost plateau to the curve on the right. And importantly, so the orange curve is the overall survival curve, and the blue curve is the progression-free survival curve with all patients treated with a Pola-BR. And at 24 months or 2 years, we can see that the progression-free survival remains at 31.4%, indicating that quite an impressive percentage of patients seem to obtain long-term control. Also impressively, approximately 22% of patients receiving the Pola-BR actually remain in complete remission at the time of last follow-up, with follow-up ongoing more than 20 months. Also noteworthy is that the efficacy with Pola-BR was seen regardless of cell of origin or dual expression status, which perhaps is not surprising since the target of polatuzumab is CD79B, which is ubiquitously present on all of these subtypes of patients. So what about toxicity? So I think it's fair to say that the triple combination, including the polatuzumab, did lead to a slight step up in toxicity. Importantly, patients on the Pola-BR arm, because it was able to control disease in a larger number of patients, actually received a higher number of treatment cycles, which may be responsible for some of the higher level of toxicity that we're seeing. But also important is that most of the step up in toxicity was generally low grade in nature. However, what do we know about the grade 3 to 4 adverse events? So primarily the increase that was seen related to cytopenias. So there was an increase in the grade 3 to 4 rate of neutropenia, as well as thrombocytopenia and anemia. But importantly, there was not an increased number of transfusions required in patients in the polatuzumab and BR arm. In terms of non-hematologic adverse events, there was no significant peripheral neuropathy that was noted. And so most of the peripheral neuropathy that was noted was low grade in nature and transient. A few patients on the polatuzumab BR arm did experience some pulmonary infection. So to summarize, the combination of polatuzumab vedotin and BR does appear to have an acceptable safety profile in patients with relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. Importantly, it demonstrated consistent benefit compared with BR across all of the endpoints tested, including duration of response, rate of response, progression-free survival, and overall survival. Certainly this appears to represent a potential novel and effective regimen for patients with relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma who are not candidates for stem cell transplantation. As a consequence of this data, it has very recently been approved for the third-line therapy or beyond by the FDA for this indication, and currently it's still undergoing review at EMA. I think one of the intriguing elements of this data is that there is a proportion of patients in this very difficult to control disease population that does appear to obtain some long-term control, with now complete remissions being seen beyond 20 months of duration of follow-up. So with that, I've got a voting question for you. So with that data in mind, which efficacy data from this Pola-BR trial do you think you find most clinically relevant? Was it 1, the CR rate, 2, progression-free survival, 3, 2-year progression-free survival rate, 4, overall survival, or 5, duration of response? Please vote now. Okay, so almost a tie between 2-year PFS and overall survival.